we have shifted our thinking from we may disagree over the means to where if we disagree over the means, then, if I disagree with you, then I believe that, there's something wrong with your character.
Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore what it means to find common ground at a time when it feels increasingly harder to do so, to listen more than we speak so that we can understand that our differences don't have to divide us. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, so that you can then take that new knowledge and apply it to your ability to empathize with the people around you. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we truly reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and who we truly are. As this episode first airs, we're just a couple weeks removed from the 20th anniversary of September 11th, 2001. And as that gruesome anniversary neared, I saw a lot of people posting on social media and talking about the need for us to come together like we did as a country here in the United States on September 12th. To remember what September 12th, 2001 was like, how we all were Americans at that point, not Republicans and Democrats, not religious and non-religious. We rallied together as a people. And history is filled with occurrences where this has happened, that out of a major tragedy, the people of this country and of course in other countries around the world rally together, set aside their differences, and move forward as one people. But it's been 20 years. And while we've had recessions and now, of course, a global pandemic, here in the United States at least, we don't have a common enemy. There's no outside threat like there was on September 12th, 2001. And my guest today, Bruce Bond, who's the co-founder and CEO of a group called the Common Ground Committee, he points to this as one of the reasons why we are so fractionalized and polarized and divided here in the United States. Most of us agree that finding common ground is good, but in those moments where we don't have that common enemy, we struggle to put it into action. So how do we do it? Well, as you'll hear Bruce and I talk about in our conversation this week, the sentiment is changing, at least from his point of view, and mine as well. We share that same optimistic outlook. Whether it's the work that the Common Ground Committee is doing or many other organizations that you'll hear Bruce reference in this conversation, there are a lot of people and organizations providing the spark of inspiration for what it takes to uncover and reveal common ground. We also talk about the exhausted middle and how, if anything is going to change, the exhausted middle has to find its voice. So, Bruce, I would love to start here. Just a little common ground between us. You were a distance runner, as I was reading. I was a former distance runner as well, although I did not run collegiately. But what were your events? I'd love to get it. I'd love to talk a little bit of distance running shop with you here to kick off.
Sure. So, in high school and college, I was a competitive distance runner on both the cross country and track teams. And in track in high school, it was, mile, 2 mile. So I'm dating myself a little bit. And then in college, it was, mostly sort of English standard numbers. I would say indoors was 2 miles and maybe an occasional 5,000. And then outdoors, it was 5,000 and 10,000 meters. Every now and then I jump into a mile to see what I could do. But 5 and 10,000 were my events. Yeah.
Okay, the 5,000. I gotta know, what was your best time?
My best time was 14:21.
Wow, that's fantastic, man. Good for you.
Thanks.
Do you
Thanks.
do you enjoy the Olympics? They were just on.
Uh,
Obviously, they just wrapped up. Do you enjoy them?
I live for every 4 years. Yeah.
Me too.
So
Me
it's
too.
just awesome. I still subscribe to track and field news. So I try to keep up with what's going on, but I'm just not as familiar with the competitors because I don't go to the meets where you get a chance to see them. So, although there's somewhat better coverage now of track and field on television, the Olympic Channel, if you will, covers some of the bigger meets, including like the World Championships and things like that. My spare time to really sit and watch a track meet is limited,
Right.
and so the Olympics are my excuse for shutting down whatever is going on to go watch a race. So this Olympics was just phenomenal. Just from a track perspective, was just truly wonderful.
I loved it, and I just saw the ratings were super, super low, and I was just like, I watched almost every minute of it. So I totally agree there.
I get it. There's just a lot going on in people's lives right now, and the fact there were no crowds and that sort of thing, it kind of put a damper on it. But I think those that are saying, are we going to, are the Olympics, the days of the Olympics numbered? I would say absolutely not. When we come out of this pandemic, they'll go back to what they were, which is a chance for people to express their national, patriotism in a peaceful context, of sport. And, that's really what it's all about is, that sort of, catharsis that one gets when people from their country, get it done, so to speak. And, that's just a worldwide thing. So, if only all of our disputes could be resolved through that kind of mechanism, I think we'd, as a globe, if you will, we'd be in better shape. So,
hearing you say that, I think that's why we enjoy the Olympics so much, is because disputes between countries are solved right there in the competition arena. Bruce, with the work that you do with the Common Ground Committee, in kind of flowing this into our conversation today, I'm curious, so much of us, I think, want common ground, or would say that we would want to find common ground and not disagree so much. But the actual practice of it, like there's no competition arena like the Olympics to go into to settle disputes. Why is it so hard for us to put that into practice, put that desire to come to agreements in a common ground sort of way into practice?
There are many reasons for it. I think, sort of stepping back a bit, I think it's pretty safe to say that the outcomes that are sought are really, there's not a lot of difference there. There are very few people that want to resolve conflicts between nations through military means. They want to do it through diplomatic means. We have conflicts in this country over issues like immigration and police reform and so many different issues. And, most people don't disagree that, we want to have like with immigration, we want to have a country where we continue to attract people because diversity is something that is sort of fundamental to this country. The question is, how do you go about that? How do you do that safely? There are some people that are threatened by the fact that there are, people coming into the country that could potentially affect them economically. But the vast majority of folks get that we want to have folks in, but we want to make sure that they're here and productive, and they're not. That there aren't problems, if you will, that are associated with this. At the highest level, that's what people want. So the question is always, it tends to be one of means. How do we do it? And that's where we have very strong disagreements. And you're alluding to the fact that over the years now we have have shifted our thinking from we may disagree over the means to where if we disagree over the means, then, if I disagree with you, then I believe that, there's something wrong with your character, that it's become a moral question and a question of defining persons, and both, or from a judgmental perspective. And that's very unhealthy. And we've gotten to that position. There are, again, a number of reasons for that. At a very high level, we don't have a common enemy anymore. There are isolated situations like with ISIS and so forth. Most Americans agree that ISIS, those are the bad guys, but they're not like the Soviet Union or the German and Japanese, the Axis powers in World War II. They're not galvanizing. It's not a galvanizing element. And so what happens is that in our efforts to belong to something, belonging to the U.S., is not good enough now. And, so we've evolved now to the point where we belong to a way of thinking that is supported, backed up by, the different news outlets and that kind of thing. And, the notions of outrage and, as I said, moral judgment of moral character have all become part of this sort of mix now. And it's one of these things where it's kind of like, the frog in the pot. You put the frog in the pot and you slowly turn up the heat. Eventually the frog's going to, boil, but it's too late for the frog. But it doesn't see it coming as we come along. And we're sort of in that situation here where suddenly we wake up and we're like, holy smokes, we are so polarized in how we look at the world. I think what's of most concern is that up until, the last few years, there has, and I mean that few years, 3, maybe 5, there has not been a strong sentiment that said we need to fix it. That's changing, fortunately. But, we're in a position, we continue to be in a position where there is a tendency to want to state the opinion, win the argument, degrade the other guys, so to speak. And that's what good looks like. And so we need to move away from that. And the work of Common Ground Committee is all about doing that.
I've never heard it put that way, but I love the visual or the idea that, we no longer have that common outside opponent, or that like we had with Russia in the Cold War. But something you also said was, I think the majority of us don't want to go towards military action. And many times we were either, not directly involved in military engagements with Russia, but certainly military escalations with Russia happened. Bruce, in your view, and with the work that you do, how do we come to find that common opponent and not, not do it at a scale where it was really terrifying for a lot of people during the Cold War of what could possibly be if these two sides engaged? Does that question make sense?
Well, yeah, and I want to be clear. I'm not advocating that we go find an enemy.
Yeah,
I want to make sure. I'm clear about that. We're in a much better position now in terms of the overall safety of mankind than we've been in the past during the Cold War. Certainly perceived anyway. So I'm not advocating at all a return to those days. I'm just making the statement that was a factor that kept us from fighting each other because we had a common enemy. And what fills
the gap, I guess, is my question. What fills the gap if there's not a common enemy?
Well, there's always a common enemy. The problem is that it gets smaller in size. And the common enemy now has become those with whom we disagree. And, there was a study done by an organization called More in Common back in 2018, and they've updated it continually, but it was called The Hidden Tribes of America. And it was a very comprehensive look at the American electorate. And it identified at one level something that I think we intuitively know is the case. You have people that are sort of entrenched on both sides, heavy, let's say on the scale of, lean right, fall right, lean left, fall left, or centrist, right? That sort of rough scale. There are people that fall right and people that fall left. And no matter what you do, it's going to be very difficult to change their views about not just their own positions, but how they feel about people that, fall differently than they do. And, that consists of, that's about 35% combined. That's about 35% of the American electorate. So what about that 65%, which is the big number? And in the past, we had, as a nation, and I guess a better way to say it is in the political realm, we've referred to that as the silent majority. And I think the most significant finding that the More in Common study found is that silent majority has become the exhausted majority. And that's really significant for a number of reasons. First of all, suddenly now there's an element of emotion that's come into the mix. 65% of the country believes that our political discourse is broken and they want to see it improve. That is, if you will, the good soil in which the seeds of of solutions to polarization can grow, because people want to see a change. The nuance on it, though, Michael, is that making the appeal that says, okay, let's all work together to resolve the challenges of polarization. It turns out that while there's this large recognition that polarization is a problem, but it's not sort of gotten to the point where there's a sense of urgency around fixing the problem. There's a recognition that we should try to fix it, but there's more concern about, the particular issues. Climate change, I mentioned, very hot issue. Police reform has been a hot issue. Today, Afghanistan is a huge issue. I mean, there's a number of, the infrastructure bill and the Biden plan and so forth. These are all things that are now sort of things that people are emotionally, connected to. The trick is to address those things with an eye towards reducing polarization within that issue. So, for example, what just happened with the hard infrastructure bill, let's call it that, where you had the 10 senators get together and come up with a deal. That's an example of reducing polarization through the lens of a particular issue. And it's our view that ultimately that's how we're going to be able to address the problem, rather than just polarization as an issue itself. Let's work on it. The question is, how do you do that? Well, you do that in the context of the issues you care about. As an individual, we want to shift the cultural norm from fight to, all right, let's understand what the other side is trying to accomplish, why they want to do that, what are the things that are driving them to do that. Let's see where there's overlap, and let's work out from there. Let's get the 20% that can move both our interests forward. We may never fully agree on exactly what needs to be done, but together we can make improvements that we both view as valuable. And that sort of mindset culturally is the kind of thing that we and so many other organizations out there are in so many words trying to drive.
I was reading something on the Common Ground Committee's website, and it kind of relates to what you just said there, that unexpectedly finding agreements without compromising core values. When it comes to bipartisan legislation like the transportation bill, and that's been brought up on this show before in the past, where do you start in an issue like that? As you look to decrease polarization, even perhaps we're not working on legislation. We're talking in our everyday lives with people with whom we disagree. How do you begin to have that conversation in your view?
The first thing you have to do is, I mean, as the conversation sort of presents itself, and that can happen in so many different ways. Somebody's, looking at their daily news outlet, whatever it is, and they make some comment that says, man, I can't believe those Democrats are doing blah, 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 blah. So if you're the Republican, you might, rather than say, now, wait a minute, this is why this is happening. And, you gotta think differently about this because you're wrong. Rather than sort of take that approach, the right approach is to say, well, tell me a little bit more about why you feel the Democrats are right about this. What is it that has led to your views that this is the right way to go? So it's a question of a process of understanding, and that's more complicated than it actually is. It's really about active listening that says, let me understand why the person I'm speaking with has the views that they do. Because the odds are there are points of common ground where we certainly could agree. And that particular bill is a good example. Republicans and Democrats agreed that there were areas where we really needed to make progress as a nation. And so let's try to get those things squared away. Let's articulate what those are and let's get them on the table. Yeah, we may not, all come away feeling like, only stuff I want is in it, but a lot of stuff I want is in it, and that's good enough. And, next round, we'll take another look at it. That kind of approach, but it involved, if you will, sort of a 1 + 1 = 3 mindset that says, if we can get these different points of view together and articulated, we actually can come up with a policy and an approach that is better than any one of us or either of our groups, if you will, our tribes, could have come up individually, individually. And so and it starts with genuine listening. That's the key.
I also heard some questions in there. Would it be safe to say asking questions?
Oh, yeah. That's active listening is all about asking questions, clarifying questions. Definitely.
Bruce, you brought up earlier that, for the last several years, there has not been a really desire to want to see the polarization change, but the sentiments are changing. What are the markers that you see that are leading you to say something like that? How are the sentiments changing?
So first of all, the study that I mentioned before, the More in Common study, was to me anyway, the first really clear, shall we say, rigorously executed mechanism that demonstrated that there's a change in the way people are thinking. The shift from silent to exhausted is significant in that respect. Our observations are that increasingly in the press, stories about finding common ground, stories about bridging divides, that sort of thing, you're seeing more and more of that. There was a good example of that was shortly before the election. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal about a couple of families that live next door. And, in family A, they got Trump signs all over their lawn, and family B, they had Biden signs all over their lawn. But there was a sign right on their property line that said, we love those guys, and had big arrow pointing to their next door neighbor. And it's just great. It's a great story. What they've done is they've in so many words, they're very firm in the way they see the world politically, but they're not letting that get in the way of their friendship. Those kinds of stories, you're just seeing more and more, take place in mainstream media, and that's a sign that the culture is shifting in that direction. And you have organizations now like the Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress that still not always front page news, still kind of quiet, a bit of a secret, But they've got. Last I looked, I may be wrong on my numbers, but I think the number is 52 members that are part of it, and it's clearly not a majority, not even close, but it's a significant number of folks that have said, we're going to put our ideologies aside to get some things done. I mean, that's a very refreshing breakthrough, we think, in the direction of our political leadership. And so these are just a couple of examples. Another is in 2017, there were probably about 25 to 30 organizations that were working on issues of polarization and bridging divides, if you will. There are now over 300. So that's another data point, if you will, that says, people are starting to, build this wave here and ride it through. So it's still very early. There's a long way to go, and it's probably going to take a generation or so for us to get there. But we're definitely seeing a change, no question.
And what role does the Common Ground Committee play in all that? Where are you at in the ecosystem of trying to reduce polarization?
Well, let me give you an example, sort of an analogy of this. I don't know, Michael, if you ever saw this. Again, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but there was an ad when I was in middle school growing up. There was an ad on television of a Native American walking over the landscape and paddling through our rivers and lakes and so forth. And there's pollution all over the place. And at the end of the commercial, you see this little tear run down this Native American's face. And it's basically a call to be responsible environmentally. And, for me, that was a spark of inspiration because I grew up in a very, very conservative family. My dad was an executive at a chemical company at the time was the second largest producer of a pesticide called DDT, second largest producer of DDT in the world. And so, my dad was not a big fan of the environmentalists. And after I saw this ad, that inspired me to do my part, not to pollute, not to litter, things like that. I became sensitive to that kind of thing. And eventually, once I was in high school, I became president of our ecology club, to my dad's horror. And, I ran recycling drives and things like that. And, got involved environmentally, even though I maintained a overall, putting all the cards on the table. I wouldn't say I fall right. I lean right in my politics, but I definitely have an interest in the environment and climate change, and a strong one. And it started with that spark of inspiration that said, you know what, I personally can do something different than what I've been doing. Not that I was the world's largest litter bug, but I knew there were some things I could do differently. Common Ground Committee is about providing that spark of inspiration in this domain, that same kind of emotion that says, when you see it happen the way it should happen, it affects the way you view the world moving forward from that. And that's what our work does. Our primary work has been up to this point events and podcasts. Podcasts most recently, because when we started, we were just events. But let's just say COVID put a little kibosh on just doing that, right? So we started a podcast series. It's called Let's Find Common Ground. And our events and our podcasts are all about doing what we call demonstrating what good looks like. So when you engage with us, either looking at some of the videos that we have on our YouTube channel, going to our website, which is www.commongroundcommittee.org, going to the events page there and looking at some of the video content, or going to the podcast page and looking at all the podcasts or listening to, one or two of them or whatever it is that you might do. When you walk away from it, you are likely to have a view that says, this is not what I'm used to seeing. Usually what I see are debates between people that are that surround a political issue where they're essentially trying to win the debate and demonstrate that the opponent is incorrect, that their solution is a better solution. That's not what you get here. In fact, with our events, certainly when we were live, people would attend with the idea that there was going to be a food fight. They would see that there were going to be people of opposite views on stage: John Kerry and Condi Rice, Donna Brazile and Michael Steele, Larry Kudlow and Barney Frank, people like that, and all of whom are relatively well known or very well known, and known to be on opposite sides. And the view was a lot of folks would come and they would go, "Wow, this is going to be great! I can't wait to see this debate." And they would walk away thinking, "Holy smokes! I had no idea that people that on paper would disagree so much actually agree on this much stuff and actually work together in a positive, constructive way." Maybe I can do the same thing in my own civil discourse or my own discourse and in my own political discussions. Again, it's an inspirational thing that we provide, and we do have an outlet for that inspiration. We did create what we call the Common Ground Scorecard, which is a tool for voters that they can use to get a sense of the degree to which incumbents and challengers at federal elections and gubernatorial elections, the degree to which they are likely to work with people on the other side. So it helps inform their voting decision as to the degree to which you've got what we call a common grounder in a candidate. And if that's important to you, you may be more likely to pull the lever for that individual. So there's a way, we provide a way for you to exercise, to take action on the inspiration that you gain. But it's more than just the voting. It's the way in which you view how we should work together. That's what I meant earlier about changing the way we think about this culturally. It has to start with a desire or a recognition to do better. And that's what we do in a way that is not preachy. We don't pass judgment on individuals, that sort of thing. But what we do is we say, look, this is what good looks like. And I bet you haven't seen it. And I bet that once you see it, it's going to affect you. And our follow-up research and so forth suggests very strongly that we're right about this, that this is what people feel when they watch an event or listen to a podcast. They come away with hope, with inspiration, and in many cases, a determination to do things better themselves.
Bruce, what was your spark of inspiration to co-found an organization like this? I know you spent time in the private sector at Gartner and in the software world, but what was your spark? You mentioned the Native American in that ad kind of changing your ecological views. Yeah. What led you to this?
Well, so the Common Ground Committee was co-founded in 2009. So a while ago. It was besides me, it was my friend from childhood, a guy named Eric Olson, who Eric moved to, and his family moved to my town when I was in 6th grade and he was in 7th, and we became friends. Our families became friends. We've been, very good friends ever since then. And we've always enjoyed the political arguments. And, we have them amongst ourselves and we make comments about others and that sort of thing over the years. That was just sort of part of our friendship. And right after, and in fact, as President Obama was being elected, and again, I mentioned I lean right, and so does Eric, as it turns out. Even though we did not see eye to eye with President Obama on a lot of policy issues, we also noticed that the intensity of opposition to him from an emotional perspective was something that we had not really seen before. I mean, yeah, with President Clinton, it was there, and there was some of it with George W. Bush, but it just really kind of hit us that it had reached a crescendo at this point. And his family and mine, we were out on vacation together in August of 2009, and we went out on a walk one beautiful day, and he and I got to talking about this, and we thought, this is a bad place for the country to be in. We've got to find a way to make this better as a nation, and that led to what can we do as individuals to help. And before the walk was over, we came up with this idea of getting folks of different positions into an environment together with a good moderator, somebody to manage the conversation, to sort of keep things honest and on track. To focus that kind of conversation on where there were points of agreement and how we could move forward and what kind of solutions could be generated. There was a dearth of that kind of thing. It didn't exist. And we thought that, we should try to do this. Now, honestly, we had no idea it would become what it is now. I mean, we both had day jobs at the time, and we kept those day jobs really until 2018. So we were in a long time before we sort of stepped out of our old roles entirely and into the new role. And that came, fortunately, I'm very grateful to say, with some funding that allowed us to run the organization full time. So it was just this, the short answer to your question is it was just a recognition that the nation was on the wrong path culturally, and that there had to be a way to start to reverse that. And so that's where it all came from.
Was it disheartening at all to see that level of emotion that you described after President Obama's, election in 2008? Has it been disheartening over the last decade plus to see that level of emotion rise rather than wane?
At times, yeah. At times, it's. I would say that it has been disheartening, but we're mindful that sometimes it's two steps forward, one step back. And I mentioned this wave of change that we're in the very early stages of. We are aware of that, and that constantly gives us, the reinforcements, if you will, that keep us on the beam. There are always going to be challenges. The previous administration, President Trump's administration, many would argue was extremely polarizing. And indeed, the events of January 6th, from our perspective, actually added a level of urgency to the polarization question in the electorate. Now, unfortunately, we think that's kind of died down a little bit, as January 6th fades in the rearview mirror. And I want to be clear, it was kind of a silver lining in a very, very unfortunate and concerning, incident in our history as a nation. But the silver lining is a bit of a wake-up call that we can't just say, okay, we're polarized, so what? We're polarized, let's just let it, that's just how it is. We can't accept that. And I think many Americans recognize that that's the case, because when you just accept it, this kind of thing can happen. And most people were horrified by those events. So Yeah, disheartening at times, but we see the momentum building slowly but surely. And every day, that's what gets us out of bed and ready to continue the work.
I'm struck by how you said your early conversations with your co-founder Eric were just talking about political issues and disagreeing when there were disagreements, and you remained great friends. Is there a difference, Bruce, between our private conversations and how we approach those versus what we do in public? Is there a different approach needed between the two avenues? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I would say fundamentally, no. I think there are nuances, though. So, for example, the leaders in, public leaders, are elected officials and so forth. There's always going to be posturing. And the fact that we've got people of different positions, or when I say positions, I mean views on things, running for office to get their issues resolved in the way they want them resolved and so forth. That's all good. That's the way the country has always been. And, our founding fathers envisioned it to be one in which the various ideas would get out on the table, and the fact that they would be, in so many words, considered in policymaking, that was a good thing. And so, yes, elections matter. Whoever wins in the moment, they have the advantage, and rightfully should have a greater opportunity anyway to get more of their agenda done than those who lost the election. These are all fundamentally American principles. But the way in which we go about that in public arena during elections, you're gonna differentiate yourself from your opponent, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. That's going to happen. And, like I say, there's nothing wrong with that. But once you're in the position to govern, now the principles are the same. And that may mean, you have private meetings with people because you want to be quiet about it, because it keeps, attention down. You can, work something out behind closed doors and that sort of thing. That sort of, environment, that's very different than a Thanksgiving meal with your family, where you have, family members that just vehemently disagree with you on something. And, there's unfortunate animosity there that arises from it. That's a different situation. Some of the fundamentals are the same, right? Different positions that people feel very, very strongly about. The resolution of those things, though, is the same, which is this process of listening, of recognizing that you may have personal biases, recognizing that people of goodwill have a position different than you do, and probably have a very good reason for having that position. And if you can understand that perspective, you're in a position to, make progress, if you will, find points of agreement, and in fact, build relationships. And, ultimately that's what makes it work. I mean, Congress people will tell you that the key to getting stuff done is building relationships with their fellow members, which is why the Problem Solvers Caucus, we think, has such great potential, because the members there, they work hard to build relationships with each other that they believe will, help them when the chips are down, when they're trying to, make really tough policy decisions. And so those sort of dynamics, the human interaction and the notion of, what you stand for is worthy. I may disagree with it, but, it's a worthy thing and something to be respected as opposed to vilified. And so those dynamics are the same. Yeah.
Bruce, you mentioned earlier the silent majority that has now kind of evolved into what you referenced as the exhausted majority. How do we keep the exhausted majority engaged to where they don't tap out and leave the two extreme warring factions to rule the roost? How do we keep them engaged?
Well, so, in any sort of demographic, there's low-hanging fruit. So, the exhausted majority, if you look at the political views of the exhausted majority, they run the gamut. I mean, there are people that are extremely progressive and others that are extremely conservative, and all the way up to the so-called centrists. And so it's a very, very diverse group. It's men, it's women, it's African Americans, it's all sorts of shapes, creeds, colors, whatever. So the key to this is, as organizations like ours work to change the culture, is identifying and engaging those that are inclined to want to move forward. And we've done some research that demonstrates that organizations like ours, there are a few ways in which we can help people, take that sort of back burner thing. I'm exhausted to, I'm going to stay engaged. I'm going to be part of it as opposed to shut down. And to be fair, there are, a lot of folks in the exhausted majority have already shut down. No question about it, but it's not the majority. And so the things that they want, there are really three of them. One, they want to know that an organization like Common Ground Committee or whatever it might be can help them hold their elected officials accountable. They want hope and inspiration. I mentioned this before. This is a key area for us, spark of inspiration and providing hope. Hope and inspiration view that, okay, we have some problems here, but fundamentally, this is still a great country, a country whose fundamental values are ones I can identify with and indeed are alive and well. Though that sort of validation is really important. And then the third is, make me smart, help me understand what's going on with a particular issue so that I can engage in it in an intelligent way, bring something to the table or learn something about it that puts me in a better position to have some sort of positive contribution. And if you can do any one or two or three of those things, you will bring people with you, definitely.
On that last point, make me smart. I see books behind you. You've mentioned, obviously the Common Ground Committee and the podcasts and events that you do. What are some other resources? You also mentioned the More in Common study, which I'm going to try and link that in the show notes as well so people can access that. What are some other resources that you would point to and say, go here, this gives a good look at the situation and how we're trying to improve things?
So this is a very, diffuse area. I would say there are a number of things I might do. So I would go to an organization called Bridge Alliance at bridgealliance.us, which is essentially the trade organization for this space, for those organizations like ours that are working on bridging divides. And there are a number of organizations in there that really do some really wonderful and interesting work and produce some really interesting content. So Civic Genius is an example where they have these quizzes and these sort of tools to help you ramp up on issues really quickly. That are, objective, if you will. They're not slanted one way or the other. There's organizations like Living Room Conversations, which is an organization that fosters conversations between people of very different views online, where points of agreement can be found and an understanding of how others think takes place. There's an organization called Braver Angels that is they've got a whole program where they bring people together in person, so to speak. Obviously, COVID restrictions in place, but where they facilitate day-long engagements with people that are in this vein, understanding the other side, and then taking that into a different direction in how you would engage and so forth with others. And there's a lot of that going on, and so I'd say that's a good place to work. The other place I would go, I would look at some of the fundamental documents that have been produced in our history. I would look at the Federalist Papers, for example. I would go back and read the Constitution. There's a lot of talk these days about what's constitutional, what isn't constitutional. It's a good idea to understand what's really going on in the Constitution. There's a lot of, I think, misinformation about that right now, and so that's another thing I would do. I would also make an effort to find credible sources of information, and make sure that you not get caught in just one. I would get a few. So just because of the work that I do, I will regularly listen or watch, depending of Fox News and MSNBC and CNN, just to get a sense of how all the different sides are seeing things. I happen to have a personal preference in the printed world, so to speak, or really online now as opposed to distributed paper, for the Christian Science Monitor, which is all about letting the news generate conversations. They have a motto that's to injure no man, but to bless all mankind. And, you don't see that in the press as a reason for being very often. And, there are wonderful publications, New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. You got to look at both. Washington Post. I mean, you get, they all have their angles. I happen to think the Monitor does not have an angle except to, like I said, to be a healing presence, if you will. So I particularly enjoy that because I always feel like that's something that gives me a sense of there's progress going on. These are tough issues, but there are people out there that are making a difference and moving us forward. So that's a personal preference of mine. But, this idea of staying informed, making sure you not get caught in your ideological bubble, is really, really important in moving the ball forward here.
If I can throw one that's personally important to me, I love the daily newsletter, The Flip Side. It presents
the flip side. Yeah.
Yeah. It presents both the left and right argument to the big issue of the day. So I enjoy reading both of those perspectives every single morning with my cup of coffee. So
I agree. The flip side is terrific.
Yeah.
Yep.
Bruce, what is a question that you wish you were asked more?
What can I do to make a difference?
I got to ask, what can I personally do to make a difference? I'm hoping to with this show, but what else can I do?
Well, the show is a big way for sure. I would say that the answer is to question your positions, not your fundamental values. This is really important. We say this a lot in our work. We're not about compromising fundamental values. The key is in the nuance. So what you can do differently is make sure you really do understand what's going on in an issue. Take the time to listen to someone who disagrees with you, so that you get not just a sense of what their position is, but why they have that position. It's in the why where you find, those nuggets of, the so-called aha moments. You're like, okay, so now I get it. I understand why people feel this way. And once you sort of have that level of empathy, you're in a much better position to avoid, the heated argument, for one, and secondly, to add something constructive to the situation in some way, shape, or form. It's really not that hard. Anyone can do it, but you have to have a willingness to do it, and that's why we believe the spark of inspiration is so important in the work that we do, because that's what gets people, being willing to make that step. They may not know immediately how, but they get the sense that they can do something different than what they've been doing up to this point. That's where you get cultural change. And there's studies, and I won't go all into the details, but there's a critical mass that ultimately is in the neighborhood of 3 to 3.5% of the country, where when you get people thinking along a particular line, that percentage, then that's an inflection point and things start to change. I mean, that, high level, that's the kind of thing that happened with, the Vietnam War, which became very, very unpopular in time and changed American policy forever, frankly. The civil rights movement and, the feminist movement and all these different things that happened back in the 60s, that was, there are studies out there that show that you get that size a population that believes in those things and is engaged in trying to drive change, whether on a personal level or a public level. That's when attitudes change, and once the attitude starts to go in that direction, now it's not a top-down governmental thing. It's just a cultural thing that says there are certain things we're not going to do anymore. We're not going to handle political engagement in the way that we've been doing up to this point. We're going to see the question of race differently. We're going to see the question of military engagement differently. We're going to see the question of how we should engage with police. We're going to see that differently, and all of those different things come about as a result of a shift in the culture of the country. I think probably the most recent example of that is the question of gay marriage, and there are a lot of people that very strongly still disagree, but it's pretty much become accepted in the country that that's the norm and should be legal. There shouldn't be strong political opposition to it. That's just how the country has shifted attitudinally. And that didn't happen because we had political leaders that said, we're going to fight for this. There were activists that did, but in general, people came to realize that they needed to see the situation differently. President Obama was a good example of that, but not as president, but as an individual. He saw that situation differently. So, these things can happen, but it starts with individuals, the public, seeing how change is going to benefit them and their families, their friends, their acquaintances, their colleagues, and the nation generally.
Bruce, that's an encouraging place to leave it, sir. I appreciate your time today. Thank you for all the resources that you shared. I will try and link as many of them as I can. Thank you, sir, for the work that you and the Common Ground Committee do, and I appreciate you coming on the show today.
You're welcome, Mike. It was a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you to Bruce for joining me on the show this week to share his story and that of the Common Ground Committee's work. Please do me and Bruce a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know, just one person, who might find some value in listening to today's conversation. Share this episode with your network, perhaps, and help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions to help us find common ground. And if you like the conversations with the amazing guests like Bruce Bond that I have on the show each and every week, subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode. If you ever want to get in touch with me, email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com or go to thefollowupquestion.com and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.